So, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Christopher Snyder, and I build AI automations and workflows for businesses. And for today's video, what we're going to be hopping into is a little bit of a unique workflow as well. So, like I said, I've just been falling in love with these unique workflows, but still provide a lot of value to any business out there. I don't want to just build workflows that are unique, but like kind of don't solve any real issues within a person's business. So, but I've just been wanting to build these workflows that are a little bit outside of the box, but still solve really huge problems within that specific business. But today's build, where we're going to be hopping into, is a revenue optimization workflow. And yeah, without further ado, let's hop into this workflow. So heading into this workflow here, so we have our initial trigger here. This is going to be a revenue events webhook trigger, and what this is going to be responsible for is basically checking to see it's going to fetch all of the current data from your users that are active on your website, and it's just basically going to fetch all of that data or whatever does user activity happens within your website. The webhook is just going to be solely responsible for just fetching all of that user data that is on your website. And then we're gonna move from our top branch, and we're gonna move from like the top branch to the middle branch and then the bottom branch. But so we're gonna be starting with the top branch here. So we have our if function. This is going to be an A/B test route, and what this is going to be responsible for is basically, has a user visited your website before? And if a user has not visited your website before, that is not going to move on to our next steps within this workflow. But if a user has visited your website before, it's going to get that specific user's history and the activity that they had on your website, whether they, added a specific item to cart, for example, or they visited this specific page. This JavaScript function is basically just going to be responsible for fetching all of that user's previous history or activity within your website. And then we're going to move on to our next JavaScript function. So basically, if this user was to visit your website again, you would have different versions of your website. So basically, you would just have different copy, or maybe different discounts, for example. And basically, this is going to be your testing function. So basically, whichever like versions of your website you do want to show, or specific discounts that you want to provide, or specific call to actions, for example, that you maybe want to provide, or just maybe different copy, for example. This is just basically going to be the function that's responsible for whichever you do input into this function is going to be the testing of that, or just going to be testing the user in whichever version of their website, whichever website version they do fall into. It's going basically going to be responsible for, okay, which website version is this user like more compliant to, for example. But yeah, so basically this is just going to be the testing function for the specific workflow, for at least, the specific user sake. And then it's going to move on to our next step in the process. This is going to be our JavaScript function. It's basically just going to see basically which version of that specific website the user did fall into, and obviously the activity that was then placed, or whatever activity they did have within your website. It's just basically going to save that user's activity, and then it's going to go into our merge results function at the end, and basically just going to basically just fetch whatever the user's activity within that specific website was. And so now heading into our middle branch here, so we have our customer lifetime value route, and basically what this is, or what this if function is going to do, is basically it's just going to fetch whether this specific user has ever bought from you. So this is just only going to read basically if the user has ever bought something from you, whichever products you do have on your website or whatever you do sell on your website. It's just going to see, has that user ever bought from you. If they haven't, it doesn't move on to the next step in our process. But if they have bought something from you, it's going to fetch, what has that cost, has that customer bought from you specifically? How often did they buy from you? Did they buy any more products afterwards? Or how frequently do they buy products from your website? And then it's going to take all of that customer's data for basically what have they bought from you specifically. And then it's going to move into our next JavaScript function. And this is basically going to calculate basically how frequently does this customer buy from you, and what is their value on your website. So basically, like, this is just going to segment, you know, basically the different types of customers within your website. So basically, obviously, we're going to have like different types of copy for if a person has bought more of something from your website rather than the people who do buy less from your website. And then basically it's just going to calculate their whole entire value from um, the visits to your website of the products that they do buy from you. And then it's just going to go into our next JavaScript function. It's just going to save all of that previous data that was calculated from the customer lifetime value segment JavaScript function. And then it's just going to save that data, and then it's going to go back into our merge all results function. And so now moving into our bottom branch here. So we have our abandonment route if function. And basically what this is going to be responsible for specifically is, has a customer previously abandoned their shopping cart within the pass of your website, for example, or have they abandoned like a form, for example, if you want them to sign up for something specifically. Just whatever actions you do have on your website this is basically going to be responsible for. Have they abandoned that specific action within your specific website? And if they have not abandoned any actions within your website, that it's not going to move on to our next step in the process. But if they have, then we have this JavaScript function here, this analyze abandonment function. And what this could be responsible for is basically just analyzing specifically what happened. So it's going to analyze the actions. So basically, how many products did they leave abandoned in their shopping cart, for example, or if they just abandoned filling out a form, for example, whatever actions you do have, it's just going to be responsible for analyzing specifically what happened within that specific abandonment issue. But then it's going to go into our next JavaScript function, and this is going to be a save recovery plan function. And what's going to be responsible for specifically is basically if you do have like any parameters or funnels set in place for people who do have abandoned shopping carts or abandoned filling out a form. Basically, whatever actions or funnels you do have already for your website or what does work, basically you would input that into this JavaScript function, and this is basically just going to be responsible for basically just whatever actions you do have is just going to be responsible for starting the recovery process for that specific customer who did abandon that specific action for your website. But then it's then going to move on to our next step of the process. It's going to be our get user segment JavaScript function, and this is going to be responsible for just analyzing how much has that customer spent with you already, and basically it's just going to be responsible for just checking their lifetime value of the actions or purchases from your website. And obviously it's just going to segment basically how much they spent on your website. And then it's going to go into our next step in the process. It's going to be our priority recovery check if function. And what it's going to be responsible for is basically, it's going to segment basically how much that customer has spent with you. And so it's going to take that data, and basically if there's a certain number that you do have that you do consider a high quality customer within your specific website or business, then it's going to go into our trigger priority recovery. And basically this is just going to be for for users who you do consider of high value within your website. It's then going to go into this function, and basically whichever actions you do have, if you do want to if you do have actions that you do treat like customers of higher value, just like if you have different funnels for that, basically you would just input that into this specific function. And we have our standard recovery function. So basically if a person does spend less with you or isn't as valuable as a customer, then it's just going to go into our trigger standard recovery function. And then basically whatever you have or funnels you do have to recover that specific customer, then basically you would just input that into here. And then it's going to go into our merge recovery actions, and basically this is just going to be responsible for just merging your recovery actions, for example. And so moving on into our last final segment within this workflow, and I bet you're probably curious as to why this abandonment, or at the final function within the abandonment cart function, why wouldn't it be linked into this merge all results function? Because we just specifically, or the data that we do want to extract specifically from our users is basically have they spent money with that specific business in the past and just determining their value. So we don't need or to see if they have a abandonment cart, for example. And if they do have an abandonment cart, then it will have its own separate process. So we don't, need to merge that into a comprehensive summary to see if they have abandonment cart. We want to have our own separate branch to handle specifically that customer. So, we don't need to have, this sent to our summary, but to then just have actions in place to already handle that specific customer if they have, had abandonment issues on your website in the past. So this is just basically going to this whole bottom branch, for example, is just going to be specifically handling that specific abandonment customer. So it's its own separate, like almost its own like little mini workflow within this whole, idea of a workflow. But basically, we just want to extract the customer's value and obviously, see how they do respond, to different website versions and then to, analyze the data based on their behavior within your website. That's what we want to extract so then we can optimize, your website to basically dedicate whichever version does work best for your specific customer, then that's what would be implemented. So yeah, so this is basically why, the bottom branch and then the two other branches are kind of separate. So I just wanted to make that clear, before we do move on. But then obviously we have our merge all results function. Obviously it's just going to be, merging the results between your customer lifetime value middle branch and also the testing from your A/B functions up top. And then it's going to go into our generate comprehensive summary. So it's just going to be a JavaScript function that's just going to, draft a summary based off of, the customer specific behavior when you're within your website, their specific customer lifetime value, and yeah, just basically just extracting all of that data. And then it's just going to be sending you the summary afterwards of basically all of that data that was previously implemented within this workflow. But yeah, with that being said, that's going to be the end of this workflow. I hope you all enjoyed this video. But actually, one thing I do want to touch on as well, just like to really point on the real key to making this workflow be as much value to you as possible, is really get crafty with the A/B testing. Like really, if you do have like specific copy or discounts that really do work for your website, then yes, like, obviously prioritize that, but really get crafty with this specific top branch. That's going to be the real key to making this workflow stand out and be as much value to you as possible. And it is really going to give you the most value out of this workflow initially. But if you don't have like any previous like, results, or don't have any specific copy or discounts that do work, just really prioritize that specific task and really prioritize the different testing for different discounts or different copy of your website, for example. But yeah, like I said, that is going to be the real key to making this workflow really stand out and to be as much value to you as possible. But yeah, with that being said, it's going to be this video. Hope you all enjoyed this video. If you don't mind, please like, comment, share, subscribe. I absolutely love making these videos for you all, and I love building these workflows that are like kind of unique as well, but provide so much value to any business out there. But with that being said, if you are a business out there and want something like a workflow implemented into your specific business, please reach out to me. I have my business email in the description. But yeah, with that being said, it's going to be in this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next video.